Shall we start? Is my mic working? Doe je hear me? Hoorden jullie mij? Ja? Oké, hij doet het nu. Ja. Oké. Most of you saw during my introduction, so I don't need to introduce myself anymore. But next to me, we have Kaneza Schaal and Court Arrington Tuttle.
Yes.
And Court, may I ask you to introduce Kaneza to us?
Absolutely. First, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. So thank you. Thank you for having us. I would like to introduce Kaneza as a visionary artist, warrior, doula, holder of space, holder of generative space, active space. I would describe Kaneza as someone who, across disciplines and across purposes and across genres, manages to bring projects into being and nurture relationships, projects, and souls. And so that is how I know Kaneza and who I know Kaneza to be.
And the other way around. Kaneza, would you like to introduce Court?
It would be my pleasure. Cord Arlington Tuttle is an American artist and playwright whose work spans personal narrative and social imagination. He writes to the future with the past, always informing his practice. His work has been seen all over the United States and New York City, and he's currently writing a new show for Netflix, as well as working on several feature films.
Okay, that's a slight exaggeration. Yeah.
It's actually not.
And also, wait, and Kaneza, this is your fourth time here, correct? With the festival?
With this lovely institution, it's true.
Yeah, which is incredible. Welcome back.
Fantastic. Tonight I have a couple of topics that kept me busy. And one of the most important is the creation process. There was, at a certain moment, Bryce Dessner, with his memory of when he was a 14-year-old boy, with the impact of the Cincinnati Cultural War, who started this process. And how did it get along? There was a certain moment that you got a phone call and you were asked, Kaneza, can you join? And it was a huge project in which poetry, music, I even saw a dancer, and these beautiful photos of Mapplethorpe were combined. And I think that's a very complicated process. How did it all start and who took his role? And could you elaborate a bit on this?
Yes. Bryce Dessner, the composer, had the good sense and fortitude to say he would not write a note until he received the libretto. And so he waited for the libretto from Cord before he began composing. So that is where it originated. Of course, from the beginning, the vocal ensemble, Room Full of Teeth, and the two soloists, Alicia Hall-Moran and Isaiah Robinson, were also in Bryce's mind. So he wrote for the singers that you heard tonight. The piece is very complex, and there are many different artists on the project who think very differently about the material, who have very different interests and desires and repulsions and attractions and questions about Robert Mapplethorpe's work. The piece chewed through 2 directors and 2 librettists. We are the standing army. So when I was brought onto the piece, luckily it was before it had started to be staged, but it had already been through several development processes. So I inherited the piece with a very short amount of time, which has, of course, its blessings and its curses. And really, so much of my job has been tending to this multiplicity of voices and allowing the complexity and contradiction within the artist's approach to this material to exist in the work and to keep it from falling apart with all that contradiction. And I can't imagine better materials from which to address an artist like Robert Mapplehorpe.
Yeah, because contradiction is part of his work. It's very important, and alienation too. Kurt,
Yes.
so you started the whole thing.
No, I was going to say, actually, speaking to Kaneza's point about having the piece having chewed through some folks who preceded us, I definitely had the good fortune of inheriting a couple years of thoughts and ideas, and what I was able to bring to that was both experience, my own experiences, and a kind of experiential learning, and a kind of deep reflection that stepping into the ring with a poet like Essex Hemphill and a poet like Robert Mapplethorpe and like Patti Smith, I had to do a lot of interior personal work in order to even begin to understand the many ways in which each of those images and each of those couplets were reflections of myself. And so the journey of the piece for me is one of deep interiority that then is filtered through the brilliance and the bravery and beauty of my collaborators. You know, certainly Bryce, the love that I've been able to develop over time with Bryce as we've wrestled back and forth and stepped into a place of vulnerability that I'm grateful for. So I feel as though had the piece never even been made, I would be grateful eternally for the journey, and you know, to have Kaneza be able to synthesize all this messiness and take all these contradictions and include Martel Ruffin, our beautiful dancer, and be able to provoke questions that even I didn't even understand in moments were beneath the soil. And so I feel like I think of myself as a kind of collage artist, and
You have a collage suit.
yeah,
also.
I do have a collage suit. Yeah. I am also transparent in that way. Yes. So I would say that is what I have to offer.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Just a note, I really loved Essex Hemphill. Never heard of him, perhaps that's stupid, but
No.
I loved it when I read his poems and understood his importance also.
Yes, I'm so glad.
Yeah. A question, did you know Robert Mapplethorpe's work?
So, I think I come to Mapplethorpe's work as a child of the 1980s. I was a young person in San Francisco.
Very young, I guess.
Very young. I was young. And I was living in my aunt's house with my mother. And around my aunt was a social network of about 10 gay men. And they were the kind of heart and soul of that social entity that I was growing up in. And by the time I was 6 years old, 8 of them had died of AIDS. And so there's a pounding grief of that time. And I remember literally the smell of bodies dying, and a kind of repulsion, but also attraction to people who I loved. And then a tremendous sense of celebration, that there were these parties that would happen before someone died, you know, trying to celebrate every last amount of breath and life, and to celebrate the community that had been built. So I think for me, approaching Mapplethorpe's work is very much about holding all of the ghosts, and that some of those ghosts' names made it into quilts and made it into photographs, and their names made it into the archives of those photographs, and so many of those ghosts' names never made it into the archives. And so for Triptych, this idea of what haunts the edges of the frame, as Cord wrote, is very central to me.
May I add something?
Yeah.
And I love, part of where I love, and I'm devastated by that part of your narrative, is that I actually feel like I was born in 1990, And so I was born actually inheriting and having so much of this history you're describing hidden from me, and identifying as both a black and queer and Southern individual. Part of also approaching the piece and learning how to place my celebration and inspiration of Mapplethorpe alongside of, and speaking to the experiential part, speaking to how I also reflect on what it means to exist on both sides of the lens, and speaking to both sides of the lens. And so my education around Robert Mapplethorpe began in college, and so yes.
You got it during your lessons? Did you see work of him? Was it?
It was a kind of, I've always been very curious about art and photography, and been a kind of lover of placing frames and ideas around what cannot quite be understood. Okay. And so in college, I found myself fascinated with Robert Mapplethorpe's work, because having also grown up in an intensely conservative and religious environment and been conditioned within that context, the way he placed religious iconography alongside sexuality, and was able to capture all these things that spoke to me in ways that I couldn't quite articulate, but I knew was true about me in some way. Like, this is my story in some way. And I think the kind of fear, censorship, shame, guilt around his images. In part two, we explore some of the trial, and so when I think about coming to his work at the time that I did, also very curious about my own sexuality, and finding myself literally within the frame in moments, and been really curious about all of that, and was curious about his relationship with Sam Wagstaff and Patti Smith, and all of that just spoke to me in a way that I was excited by what was always private. So when the opportunity came along to create a piece about it, I thought, someone's been looking out for me, someone's been reading my diary, and so that was part of the process.
That's wow. Yeah. Back to, I'm so curious about this. I know the Mapplethorpe Foundation, and I tried to use Enormous Blow Up in my exhibition, and it was a problem. But you managed. How? How did you do that?
I don't know if our tremendous producer is in the room, Thomas Kriegsman, but he has worked very hard, and we have not succeeded at everything. Okay. They are very protective. We have been blessed by the amount of collaboration and interest they've had in our reading of his archive, perhaps a reading across purposes, as the Black feminist thinkers would say. However, they won't give us any fisting shots.
No, I was wondering, because you're talking about it, but
they won't give us any fisting shots.
I missed it.
They won't give us any fellatio, and they won't give us an image we deeply wanted called sucking ass that is beautiful. And one of the things that is most challenging to me about that barrier is that I find Chord's libretto and Bryce's music incredibly tender and personal, and some of those fisting shots I find so profoundly tender, and a kind of human intimacy, and all of these questions around consent that point to a future I am interested in. So much of the imaging of the erotic in contemporary culture is about blurry consent lines, right? Where what is sexy is, maybe I want it, maybe I don't, oh no, don't. Like that's where the imaging of the erotic lives. And to see something that is so deeply questioning of consent and imaging of human tenderness feels very connected to our ambitions in how we're reading the archive. But we haven't been able to get those pictures.
I did, a small one.
You did? A small one, yeah. Maybe if we showed it really smaller, we could print it in the program, perhaps. In fact, that's a good idea. Maybe we should print it in the program. We'll work on that.
Okay. I'm very curious also about how was it possible to get the right balance, because you're working with several disciplines, and was, for instance, I think the libretto was the text was first, and the music was first, and then came you, and you listened very carefully, and you looked very carefully, and tried to figure out how to find the right balance in the combination of photos. Is it you who made who combined the photos in the end, or were you helped by the foundation again?
The whole piece is a tremendous collaboration, and I think I had 3.5 weeks when we were first building.
3.5?
Yeah, and all but one day we spent with the music and the libretto. And behind the scenes, along with the design team, our wonderful associate director, Lilith Glimcher, Carlos Soto, who is our designer, our video team, Mo, who was here tonight, and Simon Harding, who was video designer, we all worked together on creating the visual landscape in which the performance would happen. I would say, for me, what was important was to set up the structures through which each section of images was curated, the structures through which each song was curated, and then we all worked together on kind of sifting through the images that would live within those structures.
You said it already, I guess, and I think both of you said it. Is there a kind of mission behind this whole production? I'm thinking also about the combination of the American flag and this nice guy with his 2 pistols. Is that on purpose? Is there something we should know, or is it just left to our thoughts?
I will say that I am in no way, shape, or form interested in a didactic message, in that I'm not interested in telling people how they should feel or what they should walk away feeling or thinking about. But what I am interested in doing as a kind of curator of emotional space, first and foremost on the page, is taking a lot of time, practicing patience, and trying to set up a structure, like the structures Kaneza was describing a moment ago, setting up for myself first a structure that, with great intention and care, asks the audience and my collaborators and myself to go on an interior journey through the structures we've created. And so I think about the structure of the text filtered through the structure of the images, filtered through the structure of the proscenium, filtered through the structure of our various emotional experiences and lived experiences and questions. I mean, if there, I would imagine that, because I'm really interested in multiple things coexisting and allowing to be true, or at least allowing to coexist. And so, you know, seated next to one another, you know, the evocation, or really the provocation of what haunts could speak to us, and all 3 of us, in very specific and different ways. However, there might also be overlap in what haunts in our lives, in our lived experiences, in our emotional lives, or our dream lives. So I'm interested in creating space for folks to go on a journey, and know that we've worked hard for that journey to be one that takes the audience into account. And Kaneza talks a lot about resources and ingredients, and for me, energetically, spiritually, the audience is always an integral ingredient in that. So yes and no, in that some of the images, and when I began to write, you know, the images were always a part of, and not that they, you know, many of them were not even in the show, but just so that my collaborators knew where my headspace was and heart space was as I was writing.
Okay, so you used the images while writing?
While writing, I certainly did. I spent a lot of time in the archive. Yeah, I spent a lot of time familiarizing myself with what is, well, 2 things really. often what is not presented in shows, and also because of my relationship to what is often shown, I had to take a lot of time neutralizing my emotional experiences with images, to decentralize sensationalism and spend more time interrogating intimacy and tenderness and what literally and might figuratively haunt edges of the various frames. So I was so delighted to spend time with Robert's still lives and Robert's architectural shots and work with children and animals in the natural world, and all of that was very complicated but beautiful, but I needed to do that before beginning to write.
At the beginning, we spoke about contradiction and we spoke about alienation. Can you tell us a bit about how you use this within the whole project? I think within the music you hear some strange moments in which you say, ah, wow. You used, I think, the dancer as a kind of person from the now. Perhaps you can tell a bit about it. What is his function? Can you?
There is a train of thinking in Western art that associates the beautiful with a disinterested pleasure. And that's contrasted perhaps to pornography or propaganda as interested pleasures. And this is something that Christopher Myers, our dramaturg, and I spoke about a lot while working on the piece. And in 2019, I think we can understand that there is no such thing as a disinterested pleasure. There is no neutral aesthetic. That in fact, the marble statue is a deeply culturally specific interest and laden with cultural information and cultural desire. So I am interested in the piece in approaching the work from this understanding that there was nothing disinterested in Mapplethorpe's gaze or neutral about Mapplethorpe's gaze. And if we can push that boundary in Western thought about art, then we open up many possibilities and many central locations from which to view the photographs. That's what interests me about Martel's performance.
Okay, there's a lot to think about. I'm very curious how the production was received in the States.
Well, we performed it in several different places. We performed it in New York City and Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and we performed it in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a very different place. We have a chuckle, thank you. We performed it in Tennessee, in Knoxville, Tennessee. We performed it in Los Angeles. And the United States is and in Washington, D.C. at the Kennedy Center, thank you. The United States is full of contradiction. So I think the piece has met its match in United States audiences.
I'm very curious about the public. I think everyone was very enthusiastic. And we had a kind of, I read, and I spoke about it in my introduction, that Bryce Dessner and the whole team would love that the audience to receive the production as a collective and not as a person with a certain kind of intimacy. Do you think you succeeded in this? And I should ask the audience how you were sitting in the room and did you have a kind of idea of a collective, or can I ask someone to say tell something about it? A statement, okay. Yeah, is that true? Is it a statement?
If our beautiful audience member says it is, then it is.
Okay. What I really love was the choir. They were so loud and they were so there all the time, and that is a statement. That's what I thought was a statement.
It was loud, huh? It was loud tonight, I agree.
No, but that's good. I like that because the photos of Robert are loud. Yeah?
This is true.
Or was it too loud? No?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
And
Anyone else who wants to say something or ask something?
Well, I was going to say, speaking to volume, I am
Yeah.
happy to spend time with the incredible Alicia Moran Hall at Any Decibel.
Here she is.
So thank you, love.
So much of our thinking around this piece has related to getting to work with Alicia Hall Moran, who's a tremendous maker in her own right, and it's been very exciting to work with her and work with the company, but particularly Alicia's thinking around kind of vocal production and contradiction within her own physical capacity to produce sound, and the amount of historical knowledge and kind of musical theory that comes out of every note that woman produces is an honor to work with.
I have another important question. What about the future? What comes after this?
Athens, Greece, in a couple days.
Apart from Netflix, but the project you're working for. Oh.
You know what? For a while, the future, I believe, is open.
Mm-hmm.
So looking to the future, I am excited to not be necessarily spending a lot of time doing what I was doing. Working on 2 shows, I'm really excited about that drop at the top of 2020. One is a show that was formerly called Mixtape and is now called Soundtrack, that's on Netflix, and another show called Them Covenant on Amazon, and that will be, it's a part of a horror anthology series that is very much about America. So get excited. But yes, as far as the future goes, I'm looking to kind of create and conjure in a kind of liberated space, if you understand.
Mm-hmm. It's you?
I'm going to make a piece for kids.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
I worry that people will
loud.
Google my name and see Mapplethorpe photos and then see a production for children, and it will be a problem. But I am very excited about pushing on American cultural institutions to understand themselves as public spaces. And I think that necessarily in the US and perhaps in most of the West, our cultural institutions necessarily become highly privatized. And I'm finding that in saying that my next piece is for kids, it pokes at some of the sore spots in our American institutions and challenges presenters to think about what it means to open their doors and the aesthetic assumptions that we make when we say a piece is for Black people, a piece is for queer people, a piece is for elite white audiences, a piece is for children, the kind of huge imaginations that get heaped onto those projects. So as with this piece and the opportunity to work with Mapplethorpe, I'm always interested in work that provides a platform for public dialogue. And I spent 2 years ago in 2016 in Munich in Germany working with young children who had come to this city on their own from Syria, but also from Mali and Afghanistan and Iraq and Nigeria and Somalia and Eritrea. And the piece is looking to make a work for young audiences and all audiences to understand how all of our histories of movement have led to this moment of the largest mass migration in human history.
Okay, that needs an applause, I think. Yeah.
Maybe it'll come to the Holland Festival.
Do so. There's one last question. And I forgot to say something about how you told us about, and then we stop, about how the piece was received in the States. When we did the Mapplethorpe exhibition in Rotterdam, in the end, because there was a lot of interest, we did some naked tours, and it was really popular, and lots of people were interested to partake. Would that have been possible in the States?
Sorry, say the word again. You did some what?
Naked tours.
Oh, naked tours. The
Yes.
audience came naked.
Yeah.
Oh, magnificent.
Was that possible? Was that
How
would
fun.
Have
I would have participated.
He would have been
yeah,
there.
good. The Mapplethorpe Foundation did,
Yeah.
but they loved it.
Of
Yeah,
course.
Yeah.
They
loved
had
it.
to.
They loved it.
They should thank you, keeping it relevant.
Yeah.
I think in New York City, women can legally go topless, but I don't think anyone can legally go bottomless. I think that's right. It's something like that. But women can legally go topless in New York City. It rarely happens, but there was one woman in the East Village for a couple summers who was very present in her toplessness, kind of making a point about laws and bodies.
And I would answer that question in two ways. One, speaking to the legality of the situation. Yeah, I'm not sure, but speaking to folks I know who are out here doing the work, I think there's a way. There's always a way.
If you make it a non-public space, it's done, it's private, so you can do it. It shouldn't be that hard.
We'll write to MoMA, make a suggestion.
They are. Yes.
Try it.
You have to pay extra that night to the show.
Now, what wondered me was after the show in Rotterdam that people were very enthusiastic, and there were no problems at all. Also, not with the photo you weren't allowed to show. No problems. And we have this Dutch photographer Erwin Olaf, who was very inspired by Mapplethorpe. So his final photos were his starting, the starting of his career. And he's popular and well known in the Netherlands. And he had a retrospective exhibition some weeks ago, and it was really crowded. People are very interested, and I think there is a kind of change on some places in the world. If you compare that with the 80s, the time of Robert, things have changed. Not all in the good, certainly not. I would like to end with a question, and I think I have to ask it to you. I was really smitten by this poem of Axel Hempel on the perfect moment of Robert Mapplethorpe. May I ask you to read it for us as a final, to finish our? It's not your text. I realize that,
No.
but you picked it.
I would love to.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Aesthetics can justify desire, but desire in turn can provoke punishment. Under public scrutiny, the eyes of one man are focused on another. Is it desire, equality, disgust, or hatred? Is the quality of loneliness present or overlooked? Is it diminished by the breaking of taboos? Is the passion mutual, or is one wary of the other? Does fear haunt the edges of the photographs? Does it blaze inside the cornea, or lurk like men in shadows, posed for the perfect moment to snap, or strike, or sigh?
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you, audience. I wish you a good trip home. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte.